Greetings from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky. I'm Allison Lips. Rob Cates is joining me today. He has worked behind the scenes in television for 35 years. Rob is a huge fan of television, especially late night. And we are discussing The Tonight Show on this episode of GFib. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you? It's great to be here.
It's great to have you back. I believe you are our first guest to be on twice.
All right, great, cool. Yeah, I'm in the two timers club. Yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
so. Yeah, I think, yeah, Mike Chisholm was supposed to be on twice, but he hasn't made it yet.
Okay.
Wait, that could be wrong. We'll have to go back and see the records, but yes.
Yeah, just check the
You
archives.
either
But
are
I
all
wanted to
eight
mention
episodes.
I do like the name of your show. Growing up, I had four older brothers, and I
Yeah.
was obsessed with TV. Big shocker, but my brothers would joke with me. I'd be watching a lot of TV, and they'd say, "Hey, get away from that idiot box. That's gonna wreck your brain." And so they called it the idiot box.
Nice. Good to know. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback about it. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
And this whole conversation got started because you and Steve Randisi, who we're going to give a shout out, recommended the Terry Gallinoy book, Tonight, which came out in 1972, I believe.
Yes, 1972.
Yeah, 1972, Doubleday. And this is probably the earliest book on The Tonight Show I have read. I have read the book about the Steve Allen Tonight Show, but that came out in the 2000s. This came out in 1972. Johnny had been hosting for 10 years, and it is a very different perspective from what I am used to when reading about the Tonight Show. I'm used to reading about oh, this is what happened in history. And while there is some of that because Steve Allen, Jack Paar, and all the hosts in between, there's America Tonight After Dark, they were a lot closer to the present at the time of the book than I'm used to with these type of history books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree totally. I know I haven't read anything this early before either. Yeah, you consider it came out in 1972. Johnny was only on the job for 10 years. He still had another
Right.
20 years on the job. And of course, I mean, I think what would Terry Gallinoy think if he knew everything that would happen in late night? I mean, with Johnny, with Jay
Yes.
Leno, with David Letterman, with Conan and all that. Of course, he doesn't get into any of that. I mean, but yeah, 1972, it was, yeah, late
Those
night was
weren't
still
even a
very different.
twinkle in his eye at that time.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it goes all the way back to, I mean, you look at Broadway Open House way back to
Yes.
1950, and that was Jerry Lester was the host of that. And that
And
was
more
really,
Amsterdam. They
yeah,
rotated.
yeah, it was a groundbreaking show because you figure that
Yeah.
most stations didn't go on the air till I think like 1947, 48, something like that. I know. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm in Michigan, and the Detroit stations went on. I think 1947 is when they first started. So it was really groundbreaking to have late night television because usually
Yes.
they turned off their transmitters and there was nothing on the air late at night. But yeah, the people at NBC said, "Hey, we could try this. We can make some money." And yeah, and so that was really
They
the first late night show.
it took a while to get the formula to work, but they got it to work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stands out in Tonight, the Terry Gallinoy book, which is not subtitled, but is also part of the title, is an anecdotal history of America's favorite talk show. Towards the end of the book, he talks about how late night is dying and the end is near.
Yeah, that was
Which
not the case in 1972. He may have thought that, but no, there was so much more ahead of him. I mean, now a lot of people say late night is on the decline now in the 2025, but
Right.
no, not in 1972.
It's also now it's a very different environment and media ecosystem, which I know it's very technical and people probably don't love that term, but that's what we call it in the industry, where, or at least in academia, where people can watch whatever they want at any time. And late night is now mostly consumed in clips online. And we've seen that with the SNL 50 celebration, that most of that people were streaming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people would, yeah, they'd watch it on Peacock or they'd
Yeah.
watch it later. I mean, all the clips are on YouTube, and with so much of late night, that's how people
Yes.
take it in these days. I mean, like for instance, Jimmy Kimmel has 20 million subscribers on his YouTube channel. So
Right.
that's amazing. Yeah.
And nowhere near that tunes in on any given night. I don't
No,
even think, like, if Jimmy Kimmel retired tomorrow, I don't think his last show would pull in 20 million viewers.
no, no way. No, everything is so fragmented these days. And you look at the audiences that they had back then with the Tonight Show, especially Johnny Carson's. I mean, like in the 1970s, he would get like 18, 20 million viewers. Of
Yeah.
course, yeah, things were so much different back then, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
his show was such a cash cow for NBC. It made so much money.
Which is why Gallinoy talks about how everyone wanted a piece of that pie. ABC put on, was it Merv Griffin, and was it CBS with Joey Bishop and then Dick
Yeah.
Cavett?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've got a prop here that I was going to show. Um,
Okay. We love
nine,
props here.
from
Oh,
1969. Yeah, this is Newsweek magazine from September of 1969, and this was a big
yeah.
deal because it was a three-way race because you had Merv Griffin at the top, and he was on CBS, and then you had Joey Bishop in the middle. He was on ABC, and then Johnny Carson was on NBC. So nowadays it's commonplace to have everybody head to
Yes.
head, but yeah, back in 1969 it was a big deal. And I mean, Merv Griffin was successful in late night, but was really more well known for his daytime program and was very successful in
Yes.
daytime. I mean, Joey Bishop,
And then I think
he
my,
was,
my generation best knows him as the guy who created Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune.
well, sure. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He was an incredible businessman. Yeah, Merv
Yes, he
Griffin built
was.
a huge fortune in TV and real estate, and he was really a mogul, extremely successful and extremely wealthy. And I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
had Joey Bishop, he was a Rat Pack member with Frank
Yes.
Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. And I mean, Joey Bishop had Regis Philbin for his sidekick, and back then people were
Yes.
like, Regis, who is this guy? But it was a big
Yeah.
break for Regis. And but I mean, Johnny won in that three-way race.
E-
Johnny, he beat
Easily
everybody.
won.
Yeah, yeah,
And
he
then
toppled anybody who came up against him.
Regis, my generation best knows him as the host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which I have right behind me.
Sure. Yeah.
And um of course, Daytime Morning live with Regis and Kathy Lee, then live with Regis and Kelly.
Yeah.
So his, what would it be, second, third act was probably what he's more known for than being Joey Bishop's sidekick or announcer.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And Regis said, yeah, before he was with Joey Bishop, he had like a local show in San Diego and
Yeah.
I mean in New York. He was local for a while on WABC Channel 7, but yeah, that's an interesting period in late night when you look at the three of them. And yeah, I mean, and Johnny was at an advantage too because
Yeah.
he had more affiliates. NBC had more affiliates, but beyond that, he beat anybody who went up against him, and a lot of people tried over the years.
Yes, they did. Everyone
But
kept crunching the numbers to see what their share of the pie would be, and Johnny would always come out ahead. Also, can you raise that again? Because I'm trying to figure out
oh,
how
sure.
did they decide who goes where?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Merv really had the biggest picture there, and then Joey, and then Johnny was down in the corner. So yeah, I don't know how they decide on that.
Didn't Merv have like an 8-year contract, or he was on the air for 8 years, if I remember what Gallinoy said in the book correctly?
I'm not sure, but
Or was
I
that
do
including
know.
his daytime?
I don't know, but I do know that, I mean, when Johnny started, Merv had his daytime show on
Right.
NBC, and back in 1962. And if Johnny was not successful, Merv was going to step right in there and take over the Tonight Show. So he
Right.
was ready to do that.
And we almost got Bob Hope hosting the Tonight Show,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I find fascinating because I don't want to live in a world without the Bob Newhart show and Newhart.
yeah.
Newhart is one of my favorite shows.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, yeah. The Bob Newhart Show and Newhart. Yeah, both of those
Yeah.
were incredible, just outstanding shows. Yeah,
Yes. But we wouldn't have the Newhart ending without the Bob Newhart show.
sure. Yeah,
Probably one of
yeah,
the greatest endings of any sitcom.
yeah. Oh, I agree totally. Yeah.
So, do you want to go back and we can discuss some of the Steve Allen tonight? Well, actually, we started with Broadway Open House in the book, which we mentioned Jerry Lester, who I mostly previously knew him. Well, I knew Broadway Open House, but outside of Broadway Open House, I mostly knew him from his appearances on Names the Same,
Okay. Hmm.
and that which was an old black and white game show, which the kinescopes have been played by Buzzer and Game Show Network and all of those over the years. Maury Amsterdam, his lasting legacy was as a cast member on The Dick Van Dyke Show,
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
which is another one of those shows where um up there and one of the best in TV history. And then Dagmar, who I only ever hear mentioned in reference to Broadway Open House.
Hmm.
I think I've
Yeah,
seen maybe one photo of her. Like, she did not have a career after
yeah,
this.
no, she really didn't. No, my dad remembers Broadway Open House because he was born 1931, so he was only 19 years old when it went on, and he would tell me about it. He would tell me about the statuesque blonde woman named Dagmar.
Yes. I feel like in some ways she may have been like a proto Charo, only Charo actually does things besides sit in front of a camera and show off her assets.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
then we get to the Steve Allen Tonight Show, which was, I want to say 1952, but I might have to look that up. Does that
Yeah, it
sound
was
right to you?
right around there. I took some notes. Actually, I
Okay.
think it was 54. I think it was 1954 when that went on. But it's
Okay.
yeah, Steve Allen was very multifaceted. I mean, he was a really talented musical composer. You look at all the songs that he wrote, and he was very prolific with his songwriting.
Yes.
He was a big influence on David Letterman because Letterman, he admitted that he
Yes.
really looked back on Steve Allen because Steve Allen would do some physical stunts. He would do like man on the street interviews, just talking with normal people. He would do like things where he would interact with the behind the scenes people, Steve Allen would, and certainly Letterman was known
Yes.
for that. I mean, Letterman with Biff Henderson and with his cue card
Definitely.
guy and his announcer, and I mean, we got to know some of the behind the scenes people on Letterman show, like the Pat and Kenny, the stagehands, and so it was interesting how Steve Allen would kind of give people a view into the behind the scenes aspects of the show, and Letterman did the same thing totally. And then Letterman did like his when he was wearing his Velcro
Yeah.
suit and he stuck to the wall and he got inside of a giant bowl of cereal. Letterman did. Those were
Yes.
like Steve Allen type stunts.
Yes, they were. I was watching the CNN documentary on late night television, and it with Steve Allen, they showed him dive into a giant vat of Jello, but it was like
Yep.
watered down Jello. It wasn't like he jumped in and like it bounced back or something. I mean, that's not how Jello works, but you know what I'm saying. And it's, but also the thing is that Letterman was very clear that Steve Allen influenced him. And with Steve Allen, he got a little annoyed with Johnny Carson because Karnak is basically the question man from the Steve Allen Tonight Show. But Johnny never credited Steve Allen for that. And it is a very distinct format that we now all associate with Karnak. But that's not where it originated. I mean, we may be able to argue Karnak perfected it. Part of the issue is that so much of the Steve Allen Tonight Show no longer exists, which is one thing that frustrates me because Steve Allen had gone on record and saying it existed until like 1980 and then it was destroyed in a fire or something happened. So it did exist sometime after the 1950s. It wasn't like they immediately wiped the tapes, or it was, yes, it was live, but it wasn't like there was no recording of it. And to get the dates correct, we've been talking about Broadway Open House. That was May 29th, 1950 to August 24th, 1951. And then we go to The Tonight Show, which I believe, it would be Steve Allen afterwards, which was from September 27th, 1954 to January 25th, 1957. Then we go to Tonight America After Dark, which lasted for a few months in 1957, but no one was watching that. NBC was struggling to hold the sponsors, and they lost a lot. It was a lot of the news. It seems like this was still a time period, and you can see Tina in the background.
Yeah.
The orange tail.
I'm a fan of cats, just like you are. I love felines.
So we have this is the time period where like, NBC was still playing around with time slot and didn't understand that the morning and the late night time slot are very different, and people expect different things from them. And now I'm not sure if that's so much because we've been trained over 75 years to expect those things, or if there's some actual science behind it. But tonight,
and then the book talked about Sylvester Pat Weaver too, who's an NBC executive, and he came up with the Today Show and the Tonight Show, and he's like, okay, people can wake up with the Today Show and they can go to bed with the Tonight Show, and so he was the father of Sigourney Weaver, actress Sigourney Weaver, who a lot of people know from Alien movies and the other stuff, and so he was really essential in building NBC, and talked quite a bit about the Today Show and Dave Garroway and stuff like that. So that was an interesting part of the book, I thought.
Yes, if I had to choose like the single most important network executive outside of William S. Paley or Robert Sarnoff, it would be Pat Weaver, because he is responsible for the Today Show and the Tonight Show, which not only did they influence the NBC lineup, that influenced all of network television. Every network to this day has some copy of the Today Show and wants their version of the Tonight Show. We are moving away from this, as we mentioned before, because times have changed and we're no longer all watching the same thing. But that was a formula that worked for 50, 60 years. Relatively unchanged. Yeah, we had different hosts of The Tonight Show. We had different hosts of The Today Show. But it was the format, the name, you knew what to expect. You might see a new face on it, but it was the same type of people where you want to welcome them to your home, into your homes, and either wake up and have breakfast with them, or in the case of The Tonight Show, like watch it while you're nodding off to sleep. Or staying up late, because in the 1950s, it was kind of an appointment television thing because people didn't have TVs in the bedroom for the most part. You might have had one or two rich, eccentric people, but it was in the family room, the living room. Everyone gathered around it.
Yeah. And then some of the experiments work out really well and some of them don't. I mean, that Tonight America After Dark,
Yes.
it was a good concept. I think it was they did a lot of remotes. They'd have somebody in New York and somebody in Chicago and somebody in LA and doing all these different stories, and really it was pretty impressive for back then for the technology to have these live shots from all across the country. And now it's not a big deal, but yeah, in the 1950s that was pretty impressive in terms of technology. But no, it was a flop. It just didn't work, and they knew that they had to try something different, and so then they brought in Jack Paar in 1957, and he was very successful. And I mean, he had a big following, and NBC was building their network with more and more stations and charging more and more money. And I mean, so and Johnny Carson didn't know if he could fill Jack Paar's shoes because Johnny was already successful as a game show host on ABC, but he came after Jack Paar. And so
and everyone was Jack wondering, will Johnny be up to par? And all sorts of puns that
all the headlines said that, and all the papers, I'm sure. But I mean, Jack Paar had a lot of controversy, though. I mean, in the book it talked about he had all these feuds with different columnists, Walter Winchell and Dorothy Kilgallen, and he had a
Didn't
feud.
Everyone feud with Dorothy Kilgallen? I feel like she just angered people for things she wrote, and we're still trying to figure out how she died or why, or like what that deal is.
Well, the newspaper columnists had a lot of power back then, a lot of influence over people, and the newspaper industry now is on life support, basically. But newspapers were very important back then.
Yes. And Jack Paar just started feuds with everyone. But Jack Paar is one of those where I don't understand his appeal. It seems to me like every episode he just had like a mental breakdown. I know that's not the case, but that's what he's remembered for. Being very emotional, walking off because NBC cut out his water closet joke, which is a joke that by today's standards isn't even funny. Forget scandalous or anything among that. I've heard worse on like children's programming.
Yeah.
And then he came back 6 weeks later. And what the book, I believe, gets wrong is that they're like, Jack went off to Hong Kong, which that was the rumor. But I believe he was actually in his house in Connecticut.
I don't know.
Because I think NBC actually visited him there. So the newspapers were making it a bigger deal than it actually was.
Yeah. Yeah, he was volatile, and also there was controversy because he was pro Fidel Castro and his communist, his dictatorship down there. So a lot of people.
He also liked Nixon.
Which
I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
None of that aged well either.
No, and you think about the joke about a water closet, which is just another name for a bathroom, but they're very limited as far as what they could say back then. I mean, there's the story about how, I mean, Lucille Ball had her show about her with child, but she couldn't say pregnant.
Right.
You couldn't
Yes.
say that on television. And
Inciente. Yeah.
in the bedrooms, they had to have separate beds
Yeah.
and separate
Married
twin beds.
couples. Or they had to have
Yeah,
one leg on the floor
yeah,
because no one can know how little Ricky was conceived.
yeah,
But I was talking more about Jack Paar loving Nixon and Castro.
yeah. Oh, sure, definitely.
In hindsight,
Yeah.
those might have not been the opinions to go public with.
Well, and
Uh,
yeah, and then his announcer was Hugh Downs, and I
yes.
remember Hugh Downs like from the 1980s. He was in the show 2020 on ABC with
Yes.
Barbara Walters. So it's it's interesting sometimes to think about like the different announcers, sidekicks, and also the musicians too. Because you go back to Broadway Open House, that was
Mm-hmm.
uh, Milton DeLugg was his
Yes.
musical director, and he was just for a year. He was Johnny Carson's musical director too, in between Skitch Henderson and Doc Severinsen.
Right. And Skitch got made fun of for his British accent, though I don't remember it being that distinct.
No,
Like,
and he had unusual facial hair, and I mean most people when they think of the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, they think of Doc Severinsen, and he was there for 25 years, 1967 until Johnny signed off in 92. It was Doc Severinsen and as band leader, so he was that was such a huge part of Johnny's show, especially if you were a fan of big band jazz. I mean, Johnny's show was the thing to tune into,
yes.
definitely. And I mean Johnny's love of big band and drumming especially. He had Buddy Rich on there endless times. You go on YouTube, you can probably find 20 or 30 Buddy Rich appearances on Johnny
Mm-hmm.
Carson show, and so that band was just incredible.
And the second half of the book was pretty much Johnny Carson completely. The first 10 years of his um, reign, I guess, as the king of late night, though at first he
Yeah,
was calling himself the prince in
yeah,
jest, even though the
yeah,
papers did not take it that way. Um,
yeah. Well, and the thing that's interesting is there's I'm sure you know that Antenna TV shows Johnny
yes.
Carson's show, and you can also see it on Peacock and on Amazon Video and
Mm-hmm.
Pluto and all over the place. But one
There's
of
a
the
lot
shows
on YouTube.
yeah, oh, tons on YouTube. But one of them that they rerun on Antenna and the other outlets
Mm-hmm.
is an interview with Terry Gallinoy about this book. And Johnny
Yes.
didn't, he had a bone to pick with Terry Gallinoy. He didn't like some of the things that he said in the book because at one point, he was talking about Johnny's brother, Dick Carson, who was the
Yes.
director of Johnny's show in New York. Dick Carson leaves, and we mentioned Merv Griffin earlier. Dick Carson worked with Merv Griffin a lot. He was director of Wheel of Fortune for many years. But the
Yeah.
book talked about how it painted Johnny as being kind of cold when his brother wanted to leave and not very upset about it. And Johnny was always called cold and aloof, and he didn't like that very much. But so the book said that it talked about Johnny
Even books
possibly
that are
drinking.
more kind to him still write that in them. And they
Yeah,
blame Ruth Carson. Also, what
yeah,
this book didn't do that the Johnny Carson book that Bill Zima did, well, wrote, started, and then his friend finished, and we've discussed that on the Letterman podcast. That one makes clear that Dick didn't get the role as a director because of nepotism. No, who he knew helped, but he was also a distinguished director in his own right. So it wasn't like Johnny's like, get my brother. He's currently a
no, and
mechanic. He was
yeah,
directing like Soupy Sales or someone in California.
Yeah, he was an accomplished director, and yeah, and he leaves that show and does other shows and Wheel of Fortune for many years. So that's true. He was an accomplished director, and the book talked about Johnny was in the dressing room and he had a clear glass of liquid, and the book said vodka in parentheses, kind of vodka question mark.
Like, it
So
couldn't
he was,
possibly be water. Like, it's not like
yeah,
water is a normal drink.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, Johnny didn't like that, and he had a bone to pick with him on the show, and you can see that he was not very impressed with some of the things he wrote in the book. But nevertheless, he did have him on the show, and I'm sure that the show was a huge shot in the arm. I would like to see the statistics for the book sales, because just
Yeah.
getting on Johnny's show once must have sold a lot of books.
I will say that the book was not that hard to find. I was able to get a copy on eBay for $10. So
Hmm.
it's not,
Yeah.
it clearly sold enough copies where it's not some rare book, even though
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
it
walking
went.
into every used bookstore and finding copies, because I didn't know about this one until you mentioned it on Facebook.
Well, yeah, and it went into paperback a few years after '72, and so then that tells you it was successful. And
Yes.
yeah, it was an easy read. It's really a good book. I mean, there's lots of Johnny Carson books out there. I mean, there's the
Yes,
one
there
by
are.
Henry Bushkin. There's one by Zemi you talked about. If
Yeah,
people
that
want
one.
to learn about Johnny Carson, there's tons of them. Craig Tennis wrote a really good book. He was one of Carson's talent coordinators.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson's executive producer, Fred DeCordova, wrote a book that was
Hmm.
really good. Although it was partially about Johnny and partially about Fred. So I like the sections about Johnny and the Tonight Show
Right,
better.
and Ed McMahon has his books.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
The one thing I found with the Terry Gallinoy book is it is an easy read, but one, there's a lot of things that it gets wrong, and I don't know if that's because of the benefit of hindsight. And there's a lot of kind of gossipy aspects to it. And this is probably the journalist and the academic in me where I'm like, where are his sources? What is he doing? Is he citing
Yeah,
anything, or did he open the New York Post and this is how he found things out?
yeah. I don't know how it works with the books as far as you'd think that his editor would be really strict about fact checking everything, but I don't know. I don't know how they must not have been all that strict as far as yeah citing all of his sources, and I kind of wondered about that too. Yeah.
Especially since there is a lot of editorializing on things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so it's no wonder that I mean it kind of rubbed Johnny the wrong way.
I
There was a
agree
part.
with him. Like, I
Yeah,
completely
yeah,
understand it doesn't paint him in a favorable light.
yeah.
And
No, it doesn't.
the way it's written, it doesn't explicitly say it, but it kind of implies that Johnny Carson is responsible for the fall of late night with dumbing
Yeah,
down the television show and not being. First of all, there's a clear bias towards Steve Allen,
hmm,
which
yeah,
I understand. Steve Allen, I prefer. I wish more of his stuff was available to watch nowadays. But the book isn't fair to Johnny, and he was already 10 years into his tenure. So it's not like he took it over yesterday and it's like, "Oh, his first week was awful. He needs to grow into this or be fired." It's like 10 years. He's doing
yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Um People tend not to want seriousness from their talk shows at that hour, though we do have the late local news. So we're
Mhm.
not completely like, oh, I don't want to hear the hard stuff or the real world. And Nightline wouldn't have been so successful. Granted, ABC eventually swapped its time slot with Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is a traditional talk show in the mold of The Tonight Show. And we know Jimmy Kimmel is a huge Letterman fan.
Sure.
But that's kind of what I found interesting, because Galanoy was talking like we do about late night, but it's also like Johnny lasted 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Something was working, and the fact that Galanoy didn't really have anything nice to say about Johnny other than he was popular.
Yeah.
It's one of those
Yeah.
things where it drives me crazy when authors write books and then you're like, do you even like the subject you're talking about? Because it doesn't seem like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Johnny Carson part felt that way. Even the Jack Paar part to some way, but in some way, but it's hard to make Jack Paar look great because Jack Paar didn't make himself look great. And
Mm-hmm.
his most memorable moments are when he wasn't behaving well. If Jack Paar was here today, we'd be giving him a reality show and watching every moment of it.
Yeah, he shot himself in the foot a lot. I think, yeah, people could say that maybe he was his own worst enemy.
And NBC gave him a wide berth. And like
Yeah.
any other network, well, maybe not, because controversy does bring ratings. But any other job would have been like, you quit in a very public way. You do not get to come back. And NBC's just like, we'll wait it out. We're not happy about this.
Well, and with books, I mean, yeah, you were talking about it, yeah, not really painting a positive picture of Carson. People always analyze that about books, like the Bill Zemi book and with Mike Thomas that just came out earlier this year.
Thank you.
It was good, but some people maybe thought it was too much of a fanboy book and maybe not hard enough on Johnny. Whereas then, like Bushkin's book, Bombastic Bushkin, his book that came out several years ago, some people felt that was too hard on Johnny. But hey, I mean, Bushkin was really an insider. He worked with Johnny as his lawyer, his tennis partner, his confidant, his one of his best friends for 12, 14 years or something like that. And he saw the good, the bad, and the ugly with Johnny. And so Johnny was just a person, and nobody's perfect. Everybody knows that, and Johnny admitted he was not the greatest husband in the world. He was married 4 times. He was not the best father. He was married to his job, and he admitted that. He said that if he put as much time and effort into being a father as he did the Tonight Show, he would have been a much more successful father. He was very clear about that.
Yes. And where was I going with that? You were mentioning Carson and the recent books. With the Bushkin book, when I read it, I found it also reads as very gossipy, and to some extent Bushkin did have an axe to grind because he was let go in a very disrespectful way. Johnny did not treat him well at the end. But even in the book, Bushkin acknowledges that he was mixing business with pleasure, and that doesn't usually work out.
Mm-hmm.
But Bushkin was there for, 3 of the marriages? I think he was there until Alexis.
Yeah, and I mean, Bushkin was a very important part of Johnny's life. And I remember watching Johnny's show, and he would joke about my lawyer, Bombastic Bushkin.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that was just a made up person, but no, that was really his lawyer. He would say, my lawyer, Bombastic Bushkin, he has some shrewd business deals for me. And then he'd do some joke about it. But no, it was a real person. And Bushkin went on vacation with him.
Yeah.
He wrote about that in the book. They went on a yacht, and they went to the south of France, and they went to Wimbledon and England, and so they were very close. They were.
Yes.
But nobody's perfect, and I mean, Johnny had some issues with drinking, especially in New York City. He and Ed McMahon would go out drinking and carousing and stuff, and he kind of calmed down a bit more once they got to Burbank. But
and Ed McMahon wrote extensively about that, their drinking escapades.
Yeah, he wrote a couple of autobiographies. Ed did, and well,
Yes.
yeah, in Bushkin's book, a lot of it was the psychological analysis of Johnny Carson. And there was an afterword, like a prologue that he put out, Bushkin
Mhm.
did, and that really went deep into the psychology of Johnny Carson and really analyzing him in depth.
Yeah.
So, and some of yeah, so a lot of the blame he put the blame on Johnny's mother, and Johnny's mother was not always supportive, and she was very hard on her son and stuff. So he put a lot of the blame on that.
A lot of the books about Johnny seem to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, they do. But yeah, so
I
I
think
think
even
when
Ed
they
McMahon mentions that.
yeah, yeah, and with the four marriages, people kind of thought about, okay, what was he like psychologically and all this. But Ed McMahon had several marriages. Doc Severinsen had several marriages.
Yeah, I
It's
think it's
it's
just
kind
the
of a
territory.
generational thing with that. All of them were married to their job. They were.
That is true. Also, there's the weird Johnny Carson was married to women who all had various or went by various versions of Joan or Joni or Joanna.
Yeah, yeah. The first three marriages, yeah, Jody and Joanne and Joanna, and
Yeah,
somebody, one of the comedians, it may have been Bob Newhart, said that he did that so he didn't have to change the initials on the towels, the monogram towels.
I'm pretty sure that was Bob Newhart.
I think it was, and yeah, also one of Newhart or maybe Don Rickles, when they saw Johnny's home in Burbank,
Mm-hmm.
no, I mean in Malibu, they walked in there and they said, "Hey, which way to the gift shop?" Because his home was so huge and so elaborate and just beautiful.
I can imagine he did have a lot of money for that time period.
Yeah, I mean, he was his Malibu home. It was right on Point Doom, right on the ocean. He had a tennis
It's
court.
Point Doom.
Yeah, yeah, it was. That's where it's called. That area is called. It was like on a cliff, and
Okay.
supposedly he had an elevator that went down to the beach, and then because he was way high up above the ocean, he had a tennis
Mm-hmm.
court and a tennis pavilion across the street from his house, and so it was very elaborate. But hey, he was making $25 million a year at his peak. Johnny Carson was.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
And he had a
25
lot of
million is
vacation time, and by the
yeah,
end, he was working 3 days a week.
yeah, yeah. The 1980 contract, yeah, that was really his blockbuster contract because they knew that they didn't want to lose him to another network because he was hosting the Oscars on
Yeah.
ABC. ABC was courting him. They were like, well, we'd love you to do a late night show here. NBC had to pull out all the stops for his 1980 contract. So they gave him a huge raise. They gave him 15 weeks off per year,
Yep.
3 nights per week when he was there. So yeah, there were a lot of people filling in for the best of Carson. The show was trimmed from 90 minutes down to 60 minutes, which is
Yes.
it's kind of too bad. I think some of those 90-minute shows were just outstanding. They were really great. 60-minute shows were great too, but 90 minutes he just had a lot more time and could have more
True.
guests and get into more get better conversations. If he had a musical guest on there when it was 90 minutes, they could do two songs
Yeah.
plus sit down and chat with Johnny for a while. So it was a big difference when they shaved off that 30 minutes.
Yes. And now that's normal to have a 60-minute talk show.
Yeah, well, I mean, when he started it, it was an hour and 45 minutes
Yes.
because
That
the
15
local
minutes.
news, yeah, local news was only 15 minutes back in the 60s when he started. So, yeah, they'd be on just 11 to 11:15 for local news, which is you certainly don't see that anymore.
No. Are there any 15-minute TV shows nowadays except
Don't think so.
maybe an infomercial?
Well, and also there are very few
And I'm
90-minute shows because yeah, Johnny's was
yeah.
was 90 minutes for several years. You have Saturday Night Live, which is 90 minutes. You have CBS Sunday
Yeah.
Morning, which is 90 minutes. But other than that, they're
The Today
very few.
Show
And
and all
yeah,
12 hours of it.
yeah.
But
Oh,
even that, they
several.
break it up
Yeah,
into the first 2 hours and then the third hour, and then today with Hoda and Friends at the moment.
yeah,
So technically, it's 3 different shows that happen to have the same name.
yeah. So I mean, with that book, I of course I like the Johnny Carson section the best because I really studied Johnny
Yeah.
more than anybody else, and really anybody who likes Johnny Carson should check out the Carson podcast. And they're not doing new episodes, but all of
Right.
the old episodes can be found online. And that was just the best, absolutely the best podcast I've ever
And
heard because
that's
they just
Mark
go deep.
Malkovic.
Yeah, Mark Malkoff. Yeah,
Malkoff. Yes.
Malkoff.
Malkoff.
He hosts a show that's just called Inside Late Night, which is also really good. But that's
Yeah,
not
that's
just
through the
about
late night.
Carson.
And
Yeah,
the
that's the
editor.
whole.
So yeah, Mark Malkoff. Check out his podcasts.
Yeah, because he talks a lot about Saturday Night Live on there. He's a real Saturday Night Live expert too, as well as a Johnny Carson expert. But yeah, like he did a couple on the Carson podcast. He did a couple with Peter LaSalle, Johnny's
Mhm.
producer, and
Yeah.
those were really fascinating, really excellent episodes. And I mean, Peter LaSalle said that Johnny was the most well-read person that he ever met. So that really made him a great host because
Yes.
he would read the books and he had the authors on, and he knew a lot about a lot of different topics. And we mentioned jazz, and he loved having Buddy Rich on the show. He
Right.
loved astronomy, so he'd have Carl Sagan on the show, and he loved animals, so he'd have Joan Embry and Jim Fowler on the show. And they said that once he retired, he went on a safari to Africa with Jim
Yeah.
Fowler, the animal expert. So that's pretty cool. And they people wanted Johnny to do a show about animals once he retired, but he didn't. I mean,
He just
he
disappeared.
stepped down in 1992, and yeah, he died in 2005. And so for those 13 years, he didn't appear on TV very much. I mean, he appeared on Letterman. He did that walk on Letterman, which
Yeah,
was
and that was
really
about it.
a big deal. Yeah. But no, he wanted to go out on top, and he did. He was
Yes.
afraid that anything else wouldn't be able to compare to what he achieved on the Tonight Show.
Yes. And I think that was the right train of thought. I'm sure people would have loved to see him in something, but that was also his personality. It's not like we see with David Letterman and Conan, where they've come back for another act and it's completely different from the first one. So you can't really compare My Next Guest Needs No Introduction to Late Night or The Late Show. And you can't compare Conan's podcast to Late Night, The Tonight Show, or Conan, because it's also a different format. Even though they're still doing conversations, it's not, okay, let me come out, do a monologue, do a desk bit, talk to someone for 5 minutes who's promoting a movie or book I haven't seen and don't care about, and then do another short bit, bring out another person who I may be slightly more interested in, go to commercial, come back with a music guest or maybe a comedian, and then call it a night.
Mm-hmm.
It's longer form conversation.
Yeah, which is great. I think Letterman's his Netflix show is awesome. I love it, and I love Conan's podcast, and
Yeah.
what Conan has done with the travel shows is
Yeah,
really
Conan
funny
O'Brien
too.
must go.
'Cause, I mean, his remote stuff, Conan's remotes have always been some of his funniest material, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is true.
So,
I also think with Conan, people forget what probably started all of this is his Finland show when he was still hosting Late Night, which is very similar to Conan O'Brien Must Go, more so than Conan Without Borders.
Yeah.
While Conan Without Borders is fun, it didn't really work for me, all of the episodes. I think Conan O'Brien Must Go, while it's hit or miss, is more solid overall. But the Finland episode is the one that I remember the most, even though it's also the oldest. But it was so unique at the time. And Conan was a lot more experimental on late night. I remember he did a show where everyone was a skeleton. It was one of those rerun shows, and he was a skeleton. Larry King was a skeleton, which, I mean, everyone was making jokes about how Larry King was ancient.
Yeah.
They were doing that for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And, it's just, I think overall things have changed in late night, and it's no longer what it was. Most of the hosts are chasing viral moments at this point. I think Jon Stewart, who hosts a very different type of show, and The Daily Show is not really chasing those moments. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, I think, are looking for a slightly older audience that isn't looking for TikTok clips. But Jimmy Fallon, everything he does is trying to go viral.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with James Corden too, when he had his late show. He was
Carpool
looking
karaoke.
Yeah, carpool and some of the other things that he did outside the studio, and some of the stuff in the studio too. But it was pretty impressive with Corden, because CBS gave him several primetime episodes of carpool karaoke, like the one where he went to Liverpool, England with Paul McCartney. That one was really interesting. It was really cool. But that's CBS doesn't do that a lot, but they did it for James Corden, and that was impressive.
Yes.
But I think a lot of people thought that Letterman was just going to disappear, and it's been coming up on the 10-year anniversary of when Letterman walked away from his CBS Late Show. But a lot of people are, including myself, are very glad that Letterman did not just disappear like Johnny Carson did. And
no, he took 3 years off and then came back because he was bored and had more to say.
Yeah, he does other things too. I mean, he does very involved with the racing too. Ray Hall, Langdon, Letterman racing, IndyCar stuff. And no, he didn't want to just disappear into the background like Johnny did. People said that once Johnny retired, he spent a lot of time on his yacht. He had a 130-foot long yacht called the Serengeti, which is named after that portion of Africa that he loved. So he so that was a place that he really liked. He just liked being on his yacht a lot, and I'm sure he had a whole crew that took care of him on there. But he kind of disappeared once he retired. But Johnny saw people like Bob Hope is the prime example. Mm-hmm. He said that Johnny's phrase was, Bob Hope stayed too long at the fair. He was just way too old to still be performing. And Bob Hope was having trouble with his vision and trouble with his hearing and trouble walking. And he would still go on Johnny's shows like in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s. And Johnny just felt like he didn't want to be like that. He wanted to retire before he had any problems physically.
Yeah, and also with Bob Hope, I remember when NBC was doing his 100th birthday celebration, it's like, wait a minute, he's still alive?
Yeah, he lived to 100. I think George Burns did too. Some of those,
George Burns died right before his 100th birthday. He had already booked where he was going to perform on his 100th birthday and died a few weeks before.
Well, and there are articles that say that Bob Hope was Johnny Carson's least favorite guest because
Yes.
everything was scripted for Bob Hope. He didn't ad lib anything. He wasn't into small talk. He would just come out. He would plug his show. He would do a couple jokes off. He had cue cards that had huge writing on them because he had trouble with his vision. And Johnny really did not like having Bob Hope on the show, but Bob Hope had a lot of power at NBC. He really
Right. They would
did.
drop in whenever.
Yeah. So he would just walk on there. And you know what's ironic? In Burbank, adjacent to Johnny's studio, there's Johnny Carson Park, but
Mm-hmm.
that's on Bob Hope Boulevard, which is ironic since that was his least favorite guest.
Right. And is there anything else you want to add as we're coming towards the end of this episode?
No, I guess not. I mean, the sun is coming down here in Michigan, and as you can see, I've kind of got
Yes.
half of my face is in the sun, and half of it isn't, so it's not great lighting. But
No.
yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything that the book had talked about.
Okay, and is there anything for yourself you want to promote?
No, I mean, if people like Johnny Carson, I do. I'm one of the administrators of the Johnny Carson fan club, which is on Facebook, and we have over 18,000 members. And also, I have the Memories of the Rat Pack. If you're a fan of Frank and Sammy and Dean and all of them, Memories of the
Yeah.
Rat Pack has over 25,000 members.
Wow.
And so David Letterman Fans is another one that I'm one of the administrators on there. So yeah, people, if they're on Facebook and they have interest in late night TV, check out those groups.
Cool. Definitely check out those groups. And until next time, this is Allison Lips for Greetings from the Idiot Box. Remember, television is a medium, neither rare nor well done. Bye.